Hi, my name is Arlo Emerson. I'm the Outreach Manager at Tyonek Tribal Conservation District, and today we're going to be talking about erosion. Erosion along Tyonek's coastal bluff is a growing concern. Over the past 50 years, parts of the bluff have retreated by roughly 50 feet as strong Cook Inlet tide storms and periodic slumping events, where large sections of bluff suddenly collapse or slide toward the beach, continue to reshape the shoreline. To help put those changes into context and better understand the forces driving erosion around Cook Inlet, we sat down with Dr. Tom Ravens, a professor of civil engineering at UAA. While he isn't a Tyonek erosion specialist, his experience studying coastal processes around Cook Inlet provides valuable insight into what we're seeing here in Tyonek. So let's dive into the interview.
So I'm a professor of civil engineering at UAA. That's the University of Alaska Anchorage, and I've been at UAA since 2007. And I do focus on coastal engineering and coastal processes. In particular, I focus on Arctic coastal engineering and Arctic coastal processes. I've worked a lot with communities in Western Alaska, as well as on the north slope of Alaska, dealing with permafrost thaw. In particular, has been a challenging issue. And before coming to Alaska in 2007, I was at Texas A&M University on the Gulf of Mexico. So have got to look at coastal processes and coastal erosion in lots of different settings. So I'm hopeful that I can be of assistance to people as a consequence of all that experience. I think the main driver of coastal erosion in Cook Inlet is increased wave activity. And that increased wave activity could result from reduced sea ice. It could result from stronger winds or different wind patterns, changing meteorology. I've been, observing the coast, in particular around Anchorage, and we see erosion happening in Anchorage, and I'm sort of wondering, well, why exactly is it happening? Because what we do know is that the effective sea level is dropping in Anchorage. I mean, our tide gauge tells us that at the port of Anchorage. It's dropping because of glacial rebound, so that the earth is rising faster than the sea is rising. So the effect is that in Anchorage, at least, the sea is dropping at 1 millimeter per year, at least for a while. And I'm not sure what the situation is at Tyonek. I suspect that you're a little bit closer to glacial rebound, so you might actually be seeing even more glacial rebound. I'm not sure. For sure, the coastal erosion is happening. In fact, I went to Google Earth and I was able to measure, some places the erosion has been happening at like 1 meter per year, or thereabouts, right? From the point of view of understanding why it's happening, at least based on my experience in Anchorage, it's changed in wave conditions as opposed to rising sea levels, is what I would guess. That's what I would say for Anchorage. I haven't looked in particular at Tyonek, but with a little bit of work, I could probably give you a better response than that. So the erosion is threatening infrastructure along the coast, like roads. It's a threat. It threatens houses as well, which is a kind of infrastructure, and in some cases, cultural lands are being lost due to coastal erosion. And so I've worked in a number of different sites along Cook Inlet, and one site is sort of instructive. And so one of the places I was brought to when I first arrived in Alaska was Hawks Beach, just south of Ninilchik. And so it turns out that the shoreline area by Hawks Beach was probably a little bit low level, maybe a little bit marshy. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I do recall that they ended up filling in the coastal land a little bit, and then they decided to build houses there. But subsequently, they started having lots of erosion issues. And that's somewhat understandable to a coastal processes specialist, because just by filling in along the coast, you're not affecting what's happening offshore. It may be a little bit deeper offshore, so bigger waves are able to travel close to the shore and cause erosion. So I don't think when they did that filling at Hawks Beach, whether they consulted with a coastal engineer before they did that, because I would have said that might not work. The other place that we worked nearby was Ninilchik Harbor. So there is a road sort of along the coast going to Ninilchik Harbor, and that road has been threatened by erosion. And so we did some work with DOT to suggest what could be done to mitigate the erosion at that airport road. And really the solution was a rock revetment, pile of rocks along the coast to prevent the waves from eating away at the coast, essentially. So the most useful information is historic shoreline position data. And it's actually easier to monitor bluff line. So if you're at Tyonek and you're at the airport, you walk out, and then at some point you see, oh, I'm at the bluff face. So that bluff top, the bluff edge, is something that you can readily see from aerial photos. And so it's simpler and more accurate to sort of monitor bluff edge position over time. And there are probably a lot of aerial photos out there that could be used to sort of characterize the retreat rate of the bluffs at Tyonek. And that would be the first place that I would go, is really understand what has happened in the past, because that would be the basis for predicting what's likely to happen in the future. And that's what you really want to know. You want to know what's happening in the future so that you could plan for it. The state agency that is most connected to this type of data collection is the Alaska Division of Geological and Geophysical Surveys, or DGGS. They have an office right here in Anchorage, and I've worked with Nora Neminsky. She's wonderful. She runs their coastal hazards division, and so she's like the first person that I would talk to. It's just say, hey, we got erosion in at our community, and she will give you some guidance that will be very useful, because she deals with lots of communities in similar situations. In some cases, she will direct survey crews out to collect data, but there are some fairly low-tech ways to monitor erosion, at least for going forward. You can just pound in some kind of a post, make a benchmark, and then measure distance from that benchmark to the bluff edge, and just make a measurement every year and record it. You probably want to have a surveyor involved in setting it all up, or you could actually just measure from the airport runway. That would also be a way to do it, because that's already surveyed. You already have that position. So then you just have to get a tape measure out, measure to the bluff edge, and just repeat those measurements over time, maybe every 100 meters or so. And as I said before, the other thing you can do is collect aerial photos to get more of the historic situation. Even Google Earth already has some photos that are useful, I think. Yes. So, one thing that some communities have done, and I'm thinking about Napakiak, which is a riverine community on the Kuskokwim River. They've been retreating from the riverbank for decades. And what they do is they got these long tree trunks, and they put the tree trunks under houses, several trunks, and then they got a bulldozer that just pulls the house backwards, and they roll on the tree trunks. There might be a better way to do this, but the basic idea is, if you can, I think you've thought of as well, if you can build houses that are mobile, you can just retreat from the coast. That is really the simplest and best option, and that's the least expensive, actually. Community might have access to rocks, and so the number one coastal protection measure, certainly in a non-Arctic setting, is a rock revetment, which is basically a pile of rocks at the coast, like we talked about earlier. I mean, if you travel around Anchorage, you see lots of rock revetments. We have one at the coastal trail. Rocks basically prevent the waves from directly contacting the base of the bluff, prevents the waves from moving material in the bluff offshore. And so with a rock revetment, you have a outer layer, which is referred to as the armor layer, which includes big, relatively large stones. And those stones, in the traditional approach, are designed to be non-mobile. And then closer to the bluff, you would have smaller stones, and then maybe even another layer of gravel. And then you'd have filter cloth. And the whole purpose is to prevent the waves from getting to the bluff and leaching out particles from the bluff. There are other approaches which are nowadays, which are called dynamically stable revetments, where you use smaller stones, and that is, in some communities you have a good source of stones, but they're maybe a little bit smaller than what would be used in a conventional revetment. But what we've found over the years is you can actually use these smaller stones, and they can be nearly as effective as the bigger stones. The waves may move those little stones around a little bit, but still the dynamically stable revetment might work. And it would be, especially, it all depends on what's available to the community as far as stones is concerned. The first two, you sort of manage retreat. Some communities have high elevation land that are adjacent to current home sites, and what people are doing is just building the houses on the higher elevation land, and it's just like a natural retreat. It's not as disruptive as having to move the whole community 10 miles like the Newtok people had to do, right? So that is, I think, the best option. If you happen to have a good source of funding, and you could build a rock revetment, that will buy you some time, for sure. Like, for example, there's going to be edge issues, right? So if you were to build a rock revetment at Tyonek, maybe it's like a half mile to protect your airport runway, then you'd also have to be concerned about what's happening at the edges, and that there's not excessive erosion there. And so you sort of have to monitor what's going on. But as long as those rocks were in place, and as long as they didn't sort of the water didn't go behind the rocks, then it would work, potentially for decades. But you'd really have to keep an eye on how the system was functioning and make sure that it was still working. You could get decades of relief. It depends, especially, I think, on Cook Inlet, where sea level is not rising yet. You could build a rock revetment, and it could last for 20, 30, 40 years. FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Administration, has a grant program. It's called the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant Program, and they have billions of dollars available. And there's all kinds of information out there about how you could pursue that type of funding. And it's definitely time to get somebody on that for sure. If you don't have someone doing it already. And the reason why I connected you with Nora from DGGS, because she might know, about some avenues that I don't know about. The key thing is just to talk to lots of people, because maybe a single person doesn't know all the answers, but if you talk to like 3 or 4 or 5 people who are in the field, then you're probably going to get most of the information that you need. I have met with the people on Hawks Beach who were losing their homes, I guess, and and I've talked to people working with the Napakiak, the people who had to use the bulldozers to pull their houses back from the riverbank. But my sense is that be proactive, be organized, and it's great if the community has a champion. So like I've worked a lot with this community, Hooper Bay, on the Bering Sea. And I've worked with them and developed relationships with people like me, for example. So I've worked with Hooper Bay for, I don't know, like 15 years. And they've been getting significant funding over the years. It doesn't necessarily happen right away, but if you keep trying, eventually you get something, I'm pretty sure. Because the United States has lots of resources available if we decide to fund you. I think that you have to have lots of meetings. I know it's a pain to go to meetings, right? But the community really needs to, think about it, talk about what are the different options available to it. And it's really good if the community comes to a consensus. So if you can generate consensus, and I think to get consensus, you have to have discussions. That would make managing the coastal hazards simpler.